The great hall floated in the darkness between stars. It was older than most civilizations, built by species that had turned to dust long ago. Now it served as the meeting place for the Galactic Concord, where representatives from 347 species gathered to talk, trade, and sometimes threaten each other. Today was a day for threats. Ambassador Krelvoth stood at the central platform. His body was made of living crystal, purple and sharp, catching the light from 1,000 floating screens. He was tall, even for his kind, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost anything in his very long life. The Dominion of Eternal Stars had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 12,000 years. They had conquered over 200 star systems. They had crushed rebellions, absorbed smaller empires, and turned proud warrior races into servants. Now they were bored with peace. Krelvoth spoke, and his voice filled the hall like thunder. The Dominion requires tribute. We require territory. We require submission. He paused, letting his words sink in. Any species that refuses will be removed from existence. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. The hall went quiet. Representatives looked at each other. Some whispered. Most simply lowered their heads. The Sindari hegemony, rulers of 40 systems, bowed first. Their ambassador spoke words of acceptance, his voice shaking slightly. Then, the collective of whispered minds agreed, their hive speakers humming in unison. The Varax hunters, known across the galaxy for their cruelty, submitted without protest. One by one, the great powers of the galaxy bent their knees. Krelvoth watched with satisfaction. This was the natural order. The strong ruled. The weak obeyed. It had always been this way. Then a small hand rose from the back of the hall. The human section was easy to miss. There were only 3 of them, sitting in seats designed for larger species. Their ambassador was a woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She wore simple clothes, nothing like the elaborate robes and armor of the other delegates. She looked like someone who had not slept well in a very long time. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was soft, but the hall systems carried it to every ear. "We decline." Silence. Then laughter. It started with the Dominion delegation and spread through the hall. Even species that had just surrendered found the moment funny. The humans? The small, soft, fragile humans? They had only been traveling between stars for 300 years. Their territory was tiny. Their technology was average. Their bodies were weak. Krelvoth raised a crystalline hand, and the laughter stopped. "You decline," he said. He was not asking a question. He was tasting the words, finding them strange and amusing. "Ambassador Vasquez, is it? You speak for the Terran Republic?" "I do." Elena Vasquez did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She simply sat in her too large chair and looked at him with those tired eyes. "Then you understand what you are saying. You are choosing war with the Dominion. I understand perfectly." Krelvoth tilted his head. His species did not have faces the way humans did, but his body language showed curiosity mixed with contempt. "Your species is young. Perhaps you do not know what war with us means. We have destroyed civilizations older and more powerful than yours. We have turned planets to glass. We have made entire species extinct." He stepped closer to the edge of the platform. "What makes you think you can survive what is coming?" Elena Vasquez reached into her bag and pulled out a small device. A datapad, nothing special. She placed it on the table in front of her. "Ambassador Krelvoth, before you make your declaration official, I need to read you something. Galactic Law, Article 7, Section 23, requires full disclosure of species capabilities before a formal declaration of war." She picked up the datapad. "This is for your protection as much as ours." Krelvoth made a sound that might have been a laugh. Our protection? From you? Yes. Elena tapped the screen. This document is called the Terran Threat Assessment. It was written by your own intelligence services. I obtained it through legal channels. She looked up at him. I strongly suggest you read it before you continue. The hall buzzed with confused whispers. The Dominion delegation exchanged glances. This was not how conquered species behaved. They begged. They bargained. They did not offer paperwork. Krelvoth gestured, and a junior member of his delegation hurried forward to take the datapad. The ambassador looked at the screen. The first page was simple enough. Basic information about humanity. Their origin world, a place called Earth. Their population. Their military strength. Their technology levels. Nothing impressive. Nothing threatening. Then he turned to the second page, and the third. And they, fourth. The hall watched as something strange happened. Krelvoth's crystalline form began to flicker. For his species, this was the equivalent of going pale. His sharp edges seemed to soften slightly. He stopped moving entirely, frozen in place as he read. Elena Vasquez waited. She did not smile, but there was something in her eyes. Something patient and knowing. Minutes passed. The other delegates grew restless. What could possibly be in that document? What could make an ambassador of the Dominion that had conquered half a galaxy, stand frozen with fear? Finally, Krelvoth looked up. This. He stopped. Started again. These claims are exaggerated. They must be. They were written by your own people, Elena said. They had access to our history, our military records, our biology. They studied us very carefully. She paused. Did you get to the part about what we did to each other before we reached the stars? The wars we fought? The weapons we built? Krelvoth did not answer. Did you read about our endurance? How we used to hunt animals by simply following them until they collapsed from exhaustion. How we would walk for days, never stopping, never resting, until our prey literally died of fear and fatigue. Still no answer. Did you see the section about spite? How we will sometimes fight not because we can win, but simply because someone told us we couldn't. How we once sent men to our moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. The hall was completely silent now. Every species was watching. Elena Vasquez finally stood. She was short, barely reaching the shoulders of most delegates. But somehow, in that moment, she seemed larger. You have 12 hours to withdraw your declaration, she said. After that, we accept your terms. We will be at war. She gathered her things. Use the time wisely. Read the whole document. Talk to your council. Make the smart choice. She turned and walked toward the exit. Her two human companions followed Dot at the door. She paused and looked back. Ambassador Krelvoth? One more thing. She smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something terrible was about to happen. We've been waiting for someone to try this. We've been waiting for a very long time. Then she was gone, Dot, and in the great hall, floating in the darkness between stars. 346 species began to wonder if they had just witnessed the beginning of the end, not for humanity, but for the dominion of eternal stars. Krelvoth returned to the Dominion flagship alone. He needed silence. He needed to think. Most importantly, he needed to read the rest of the document. His private chambers were made of polished stone from his homeworld. The walls glowed with soft purple light. It was a place of peace, where he had made many important decisions over his 3,000 years of life. Tonight, it felt like a tomb. He sat down and opened the datapad again. The document was long. Over 200 pages of analysis, research, and conclusions. It had been compiled by the Dominion's best intelligence officers over the past century. They had studied humanity carefully, secretly, from a distance. They had intercepted communications, analyzed broadcasts, and even captured a few human ships for examination. What they found had disturbed them deeply. Krelvoth began to read. The first section was about human biology. On the surface, humans seemed unremarkable. They were soft, fragile, and short-lived. They could not survive in vacuum. They needed constant supplies of water and oxygen. Their natural weapons, teeth and nails, were laughably weak. But then the analysts went deeper. Humans, they explained, came from a world that was actively trying to kill them. Earth was covered with predators, parasites, diseases, and natural disasters. The gravity was heavy. The weather was violent. The other animals were deadly, and humans had not just survived. They had conquered. They had spread across every environment on their planet. They lived in frozen wastelands where the temperature dropped far below freezing. They lived in deserts where water was almost impossible to find. They lived on mountains so high that most species could not breathe. They built cities in swamps, forests, and volcanic islands. The analysts noted that humans could survive injuries that would kill most species. They could lose limbs and continue fighting. They could function with diseases that would put others in medical comas. Their bodies healed with remarkable speed, and their tolerance for pain was almost impossible to measure. One analyst had written, "They treat wounds that would incapacitate us as minor inconveniences." I observed a human soldier continue a training exercise with a broken arm. When asked why, he said it was just a fracture and that he would walk it off. I do not understand these words in this context. Krelvoth turned the page. The second section was about human hunting methods. This was where things became truly disturbing. Humans, the document explained, were persistent predators. This meant they did not rely on speed or strength to catch their prey. Instead, they simply followed their target. They walked after it. For hours. For days. Across any terrain, the prey would run, but humans would keep walking. The prey would hide, but humans would find it. The prey would rest, but humans would not stop. Eventually, the prey would collapse from exhaustion, terror, and dehydration. And the humans would be right there, having never stopped, having never given up, having never shown mercy. The analyst who wrote this section had included a note. This behavior pattern has transferred to their military doctrine. Human commanders do not seek quick victories. They seek inevitable ones. Their strategic documents include phrases such as "we will find you" and "we will outlast you." These are not threats. They are statements of capability. Krelvoth felt his crystal structure vibrate with unease. He continued reading. The third section covered human history, specifically their wars. This was the longest section. It was also the most horrifying. Humans, it turned out, had spent most of their existence fighting each other. Not small skirmishes, not territorial disputes. Full-scale wars that killed millions sometimes, tens of millions of their own kind. They had invented weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering. Chemical weapons that burned the lungs. Biological weapons that turned the body against itself. And then, while they were still confined to a single planet, they had invented nuclear weapons. The analyst had written, "They created devices capable of destroying entire cities in a single flash. Weapons that poisoned the land for generations. And then, this is the part I cannot comprehend, they used them. On themselves, twice, on civilian population centers." A second analyst had added a comment. I requested psychological evaluation after completing this section. The medical officer agreed it was necessary. Krelvoth paused. He had lived for 3,000 years. He had seen terrible things. He had ordered terrible things. But the idea of a species willingly using weapons of mass destruction on its own people was beyond his Understanding. He read on. The fourth section discussed human psychology. And this was perhaps the most troubling of all. Humans, the analysts explained, formed extremely strong emotional bonds. They bonded with other humans, which was normal. But they also bonded with animals, with machines, with places, and sometimes with abstract concepts like honor or justice. These bonds were so strong that humans would die to protect them. Not might die. Would die, willingly, without hesitation. One analyst had observed a human crew during a spacecraft emergency. When it became clear that someone would need to stay behind to manually operate a system, 3 crew members had immediately volunteered. Not because they were ordered to, not because they drew lots. They simply stepped forward, each trying to be the one who sacrificed themselves so the others could live. The analyst wrote, "I do not understand this behavior. Self-preservation is the most basic instinct. These humans overrode it without apparent effort." When I asked the survivor why, she said, "They were my family. The other crew members were not biologically related to her." But the final section was the one that had made Krulvath's form flicker in the assembly hall. It was titled simply, Spite. The analysts had struggled to explain this concept. It did not exist in Dominion psychology. It barely existed in most species. But in humans, it was a driving force. Spite, they wrote, was the desire to succeed specifically because someone said you would fail. It was the willingness to suffer greatly just to prove a point. It was the commitment to victory, not because victory was beneficial, but because defeat was personally offensive. Humans would fight battles they could not win. They would continue campaigns that made no strategic sense. They would sacrifice everything: comfort, safety, even their lives, simply because an enemy had told them to surrender. One analyst had included a historical example. A human nation, surrounded by enemies, facing certain defeat, had received a demand for surrender. Their response had been a single word that translated roughly to nuts. They had then continued fighting until reinforcements arrived, suffering enormous casualties, but refusing to give up. The analyst wrote, "This is not rational behavior. This is not survival instinct. This is something else. Something we do not have a word for. I recommend extreme caution when dealing with this species." Krulvath set down the datapad. The room was silent. The purple light seemed dimmer now. He thought about the human ambassador. Her tired eyes. Her calm voice. Her smile. She had known. She had known exactly what was in this document, and she had known how he would react. She had given him a chance to read it, to understand, to withdraw. 12 hours. Krulvath stood and walked to his communications terminal. He needed to speak with the High Council. They needed to see this document. They needed to understand what they were facing, because for the first time in 3,000 years, Krulvath was afraid, not of death. He had faced death many times. But of something worse, thought he was afraid of a species that would follow him forever. That would never stop. That would burn their own worlds rather than surrender. That would fight not to win, but simply to make sure he lost. He was afraid of humans, Dodd, and he had 12 hours to convince his government to be afraid too. The High Council chamber was carved from a single massive crystal. It had taken 1,000 years to shape, and it had stood for 11,000 more. Light filtered through its walls, creating patterns that changed with the movement of their star. It was the most sacred place in the Dominion. Today, it was filled with argument. Krulvath stood before the 7 members of the High Council, the datapad in his hands. He had spent the last 3 hours reading sections aloud, explaining the implications, begging them to understand. Some of them did. Council of Vethra, the oldest among them, had listened with growing concern. She had lived for 8,000 years and had seen the Dominion at its best and worst. She understood that pride could be as dangerous as any weapon. "We should withdraw," she said. Her voice was like wind through crystal chimes. This is not cowardice. This is wisdom. These humans are not like the others we have conquered. But the High Crystal Lodge did not agree. Torvax the Eternal had ruled the Dominion for 600 years. He was enormous, twice the size of any other member of his species, and his crystal form was the deep red of dried blood. He had built his empire through conquest, and he had never retreated from any enemy. "We do not bow," he said. "Not to the Sindari, not to the Collective, and certainly not to these soft, short-lived creatures who have only been among the stars for a handful of centuries." "Your Luminance," Krovos said carefully. "The threat assessment was written by our own intelligence. I read your assessment." Torvax's voice shook the chamber. "I read about their history and their wars and their spite. You know what I see? I see a species that has spent most of its existence killing itself. If they are so dangerous, why are they not already masters of the galaxy? Why do they sit in their tiny corner of space, quiet and weak? They are not weak. They are waiting." "Waiting?" Torvax laughed. The sound was like breaking glass. "Waiting for what, for us?" "Ambassador, the Dominion has crushed species that controlled 1,000 worlds. We have faced hive minds with trillions of soldiers. We have destroyed civilizations that had mastered technologies these humans cannot even imagine. And you want me to fear them because they walked after animals until they fell down? I want you to be cautious. Caution is for prey." Torvax rose from his throne. "The Dominion is not prey. We are the hunters. We have always been the hunters. And if these humans want to learn what that means, we will be happy to teach them." The vote was held. 4 in favor of war, 3 against. The motion passed. Kralvov left the chamber with a heavy feeling in his chest. He had tried. He had done everything he could. Now all he could do was watch. The 12 hours passed at the exact moment the deadline expired. The human response arrived. It was not a message. It was not a negotiation. It was an action. 17 Dominion border stations went dark at the same moment. Security feeds showed human ships appearing from nowhere. They've been hiding in the radiation shadows of stars, in the debris fields of dead systems, and places the Dominion had never thought to look. The attacks were fast, precise, and brutal. No warnings. No demands. Just destruction. The Dominion's primary military shipyard, a massive structure that had been producing warships for 3,000 years, was hit by a weapon the analysts had never seen before. It was not a missile or a beam. It was something else. The entire station simply came apart, as if the forces holding it together had decided to stop working. 40,000 workers died in seconds, and then came the broadcast. Every frequency in the galaxy carried it. Every species with a receiver heard it. The message was simple, direct, and delivered by a human male in military uniform. He had gray hair and scars on his face and eyes that had seen terrible things. "You were warned," he said. "You were given a choice. You chose poorly. This is what happens next." The screen behind him showed an image. It was a planet, one of the Dominion's oldest colonies, a world they had held for 10,000 years, a symbol of their eternal power. It was surrounded by human warships, hundreds of them. They had appeared from nowhere, as if they had always been there, waiting. "We are not coming to conquer," the human continued. "We do not want your worlds. We do not want your wealth. We do not want your submission. We are coming because you threatened our children, our families, our future, and we want you to understand something." He leaned forward. His eyes seemed to look directly at whoever was watching. "We are what happens when a Deathworld species gets angry." The transmission ended in the High Council chamber. Torvax watched the recording 3 times. He did not speak. He did not move. For the first time in 600 years, he had no idea what to do. The border stations were gone. The shipyard was destroyed. And somehow, impossibly, the humans had moved a fleet across half the galaxy without anyone noticing. The Dominion spy networks, the best in known space, had seen nothing. Their early warning systems had detected nothing. The humans had simply appeared, like ghosts, like nightmares. Counselor Vethra spoke into the silence. "They were waiting," she said. "Just as your ambassador told you. They have been waiting for someone to start something. And now someone has." Torvax finally moved. He turned to his military commanders, who had gathered at the edge of the chamber. "How did they do this?" he demanded. "How did they move ships across our territory without detection?" The commanders looked at each other. None of them wanted to answer. Finally, one stepped forward. She was young by their standards, only 1,000 years old, but she had risen quickly through the ranks by being honest when others were afraid. "They did not move across our territory, your luminance. They moved around it, through regions we considered impassable, through asteroid fields and nebulae and the gravity wells of dying stars. They went where we would never think to look, because we would never think to go there ourselves. That is impossible. No ship could survive those conditions." The commander pulled up a display. It showed the path the human fleet had taken. It was insane. It cut through some of the most dangerous regions in the galaxy. Any other species would have lost half their ships just from navigation errors. "Human ships are not better than ours," the commander said. "But human crews are different. They can survive things that would kill us. They can function in conditions that would drive us mad. They flew through hell to reach that planet, and they did it without losing a single vessel." Torvax stared at the display for a long moment. "Then we will destroy them," he said. "We will send the Grand Fleet. We will crush this invasion force, and then we will burn their homeworld to ash." "Your luminance," the commander said carefully. "That fleet is not an invasion force. According to our estimates, it represents perhaps 10% of human military capacity." The chamber went silent. 10%? "Yes, your luminance. Our analysts believe the humans have been building ships in secret for the past 2 centuries. Deep space construction, hidden in the outer regions of their territory. We thought they were quiet because they were weak. We were wrong. They were quiet because they were preparing." Torvax sat down heavily on his throne. Across the galaxy, the other species watched the news feeds with a mixture of terror and fascination. The Dominion, the great power that had demanded their submission just hours ago, was now facing something they had never faced before, a real threat. And in the human fleet, surrounding that ancient Dominion colony, Admiral James Chun looked at the world below and thought about his daughter. She was 7 years old. She was back on Earth, probably asleep right now, dreaming about stars and adventures and all the things children dreamed about. The Dominion had threatened her. They had threatened every human child. They had promised extinction. Chun had been a soldier for 40 years. He had hoped to retire soon, to spend his final years teaching and gardening and watching his grandchildren grow. Instead, he was here, at the start of a war that would change the galaxy. He opened a channel to his fleet. "This is Admiral Chun. The enemy has rejected our warning. They have chosen war. So now we show them what war means." He paused. "Remember who we are. Remember what we're fighting for. And remember, we don't know how to quit." The fleet began to move. Admiral Kethros had commanded the Dominion's 3rd Fleet for 400 years. He had never lost a battle. His tactics were studied in military academies across the galaxy. He was considered one of the finest naval minds of his generation. None of that mattered anymore. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his fleet die. The humans were everywhere. Their ships were smaller, weaker, less elegant than his own. By every measure of naval power, the Dominion should be winning, but the humans did not fight the way they were supposed to. They used tactics that no sane species would attempt. Suicide runs through fields of debris. Attacks from angles that required flying through asteroid belts at full speed. Ships that deliberately crashed into Dominion vessels, their crews ejecting at the last second to be picked up later. One human destroyer, badly damaged in bending atmosphere, had flown directly into the engine section of a Dominion battleship. The captain had broadcasted a message just before impact. "See you in hell." Kethros did not understand. His species valued survival above all else. They fought to win, yes, but they also fought to live. The humans seemed to have a different priority. They fought to make the enemy lose, even if it cost them everything. His tactical officer reported the latest numbers. They had destroyed 37 human ships. They had lost 112. The exchange rate was impossible. The humans should not be winning this badly. "They are learning," the tactical officer said. "Every engagement they adapt. They study our tactics and find weaknesses. They share information between ships in real time. They are getting better while we stay the same." Kethros watched another Dominion cruiser explode on his screen. How are they doing this? How are their crews functioning under these conditions? The tactical officer brought up a biological readout. Human bodies produce chemicals under stress: adrenaline, cortisol. These chemicals increase their physical abilities, sharpen their focus, and suppress pain. In combat, humans become faster, stronger, and harder to kill. They essentially transform into more dangerous versions of themselves. Kethros remembered something from the threat assessment. Persistence predators. They did not just hunt. They evolved to hunt. Every part of their biology was designed for conflict. "Order the fleet to fall back," he said. "We need to regroup." It was the first retreat of his career, far away, on a world called Theron 7. Ground Commander Vashko was learning the same lessons. Theron 7 had been conquered 2 weeks ago. It should have been simple to hold. The Dominion had superior numbers, superior weapons, and superior technology. The human population had been reduced to scattered resistance groups hiding in the Kadaya mountains and forests. But the resistance would not die. Vashko had deployed 10,000 soldiers to secure the planet. He had lost 3,000 in the first week alone. Not to pitched battles, not to organized military action, to shadows and traps and ghosts that struck without warning and vanished before his troops could respond. The humans fought in the dark. They fought in the mud. They fought in conditions that should have killed them. They set traps that were crude but effective. They used the terrain as a weapon, luring Dominion patrols into valleys and caves where superior firepower meant nothing. One incident haunted Vashko. His troops had cornered a group of human fighters in a collapsed building. The humans were outnumbered 20 to 1. They had no food, no water, no ammunition. They should have surrendered. Instead, they had fought for 6 hours. 6 hours of brutal close-quarters combat that had cost Vashko 40 soldiers. When the last human finally fell, a woman with 7 bullet wounds and a broken arm, she had been smiling. Smiling. His interrogators had captured 1 human soldier alive. They had asked him why his people kept fighting when victory was impossible. His answer had confused them. "Victory isn't impossible," he had said. "You just haven't figured that out yet." The soldier had died 3 days later, from injuries he had sustained before capture. The medical officer reported that he should have died immediately. Instead, his body had kept functioning through sheer willpower, just long enough to give false information that had led a Dominion patrol into an ambush, even in death. The humans were fighting. Vashko requested reinforcements. Command denied him. They had no reinforcements to send. Every front was the same. Meanwhile, in a refugee camp on a world called New Geneva. A Dominion spy named Silith was learning something different. Silith had been trained to break enemy morale. She had infiltrated dozens of species during her career, studying how they responded to defeat. Most species crumbled quickly. They lost hope. They stopped believing in the future. They became easy to control. Humans were not like other species. She had entered the camp expecting to find despair. The humans here had lost their homes. Their cities had been bombed. Their families had been scattered across the stars. By every rational measure, they should have been broken. Instead, they were a laughing dot. She watched children playing games in the dirt between tents. She watched adults building gardens in soil that was still contaminated from the attacks. She watched old men teaching young ones how to repair machines, how to purify water, how to survive. One human noticed her watching. He was middle-aged, with a prosthetic arm and a scar that ran from his forehead to his chin. He walked over and offered her a cup of something hot. "Rough day?" he asked. Silith did not know how to respond. She was the enemy. She was here to gather intelligence on human weaknesses. And this man was offering her kindness. "I do not understand," she said finally. "Your world is burning. Your people are dying. How are you not afraid?" The man shrugged. "Oh, we're afraid. We'd be stupid not to be. But fear doesn't help anything. Fear just makes you slow and stupid." He gestured at the camp around them. "So we do what we always do. We survive. We adapt. We keep going. But you cannot win this war." The man smiled. It was a strange smile, full of something she could not identify. That's what they always say. Every enemy we've ever faced has said the same thing. And yet, here we are. He took a drink from his cup. Humanity doesn't win because we're stronger or smarter or better equipped. We win because we don't know when to quit. And eventually, our enemies do. Silith returned to her handlers that night. Her report was brief. "I found no weaknesses. I recommend immediate diplomatic negotiations." Her handlers ignored the recommendation. On a ship far from the fighting, historian Calathren of the Watching Ones recorded everything. Her species had existed for 2 million years. They did not participate in galactic affairs. They only observed. They had watched empires rise and fall, species ascend and vanish, civilizations bloom and wither. She had never seen anything like humanity. In her notes, she wrote, "Other species fight to survive. Humans fight to win. This is a fundamental difference that most observers fail to understand. Survival is about not dying. Winning is about making sure the enemy loses. Humans will accept tremendous costs to themselves as long as the cost to their enemy is greater. This is not rational by most species standards. But rationality has nothing to do with it." She continued, "The Dominion expected a quick victory. They expected humans to behave like every other conquered species, to surrender when the odds became impossible, to accept defeat when resistance became painful. They did not understand that pain is not a deterrent for humans. It is a motivation. The more a human suffers, the more determined they become." She paused in her writing to watch the latest battle footage. A human frigate, its engines destroyed and its hull breached, was still firing. Its crew had sealed themselves in the command section and were using manual targeting systems to continue the fight. They had no hope of survival. They were fighting anyway. 6 months into the war, Calathren compiled her preliminary conclusions. The Dominion has lost more territory in 6 months than in the previous 1,000 years. Their economy is failing. Their military is exhausted. Their subject species are beginning to rebel, inspired by human broadcasts that tell them victory is possible. The Dominion is not accustomed to losing. They do not know how to adapt to failure. They keep waiting for humans to break. Humans keep refusing to do so. She added a final note. I have observed many species reach this point. Most either escalate to total war or seek peace. The Dominion is too proud for peace. But I do not think they understand what total war against humanity would mean. The humans have not yet revealed their full capabilities. I believe they are waiting. I believe they want the Dominion to escalate. I do not know why, but the thought disturbs me greatly. She saved her notes and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, humanity was still fighting, still refusing to stop, still proving everything the galaxy thought it knew about war wrong. And the Dominion was learning what it meant to face a species that had been forged on a death world, tempered by millennia of conflict and hardened by the absolute certainty that surrender was never an option. 1 year after the war began, the High Crystal Arch came to the Galactic Concord Assembly Hall. Torvax, the Eternal, looked different now. His crystal form, once the deep red of dried blood, had faded to a pale pink. He moved slowly, carefully, like someone who had been badly injured and never fully healed. The confidence that had defined him for 600 years was gone. Behind him walked the remnants of his delegation. There had been 20 of them at the start. Now there were 4. The hall was full. Every species had sent representatives to watch. Some came out of curiosity. Some came to gloat. Most came because they could not quite believe what was happening. The Dominion, the great power that had terrified the galaxy for 12,000 years, was about to surrender. Elena Vasquez was already waiting. She sat in the same seat she had occupied a year ago, still wearing simple clothes, still looking tired. But there was something different about her eyes now. They had seen victory. They had seen what humanity could do when it decided to fight. She did not stand as Torvax approached. She did not bow. She simply waited that the High Crystal Arch stop at the negotiating table. For a long moment, he did not speak. Then, slowly, he lowered himself into a chair across from her. Your terms, he said. His voice was quiet. Defeated Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a document. It was actual paper, made from trees. The humans had insisted on using physical copies for important agreements. Something about tradition. She slid it across the table. Torvax picked it up and began to read. His form flickered with confusion. This is brief. Yes. He read it again. The terms were simple. Almost insultingly simple. First, a formal apology to humanity, broadcast galaxy-wide. The Dominion would admit that they had started the war, that they had threatened human civilians, and that they had been wrong to do so. Second, reparations to human civilians affected by the war. The amount was significant, but not crippling. It would take the Dominion, perhaps 50 years to pay, but it would not destroy their economy. Third, the Dominion would never threaten another species without reading the threat assessment first. A strange requirement, almost humorous. That was all. No territory. No tribute. No subjugation. No demands for political changes or military limitations. Torvax looked up at Elena. I do not understand, he said. You have won. You have defeated the greatest military power in the galaxy. You could demand anything. Our worlds. Our technology. Our submission. Why do you ask for so little? Elena leaned back in her chair. Because we are not conquerors, your luminance. We never were. We never wanted your worlds. We never wanted your wealth. We never wanted your empire. She paused. We just wanted you to leave us alone. That cannot be true. No species fights a war like this just to be left alone. Humanity does. Elena's voice was calm, patient, like a teacher explaining something obvious to a confused student. We have a saying on Earth. Don't start none, won't be none. You started something. We finished it. Now we go back to our lives. Torvak shook his head. His crystal structure made a sound like wind chimes in a storm. But the cost, the ships you lost, the soldiers who died, the resources you spent. You could have conquered half the galaxy with what this war cost you. We could have. We chose not to? Elena leaned forward. Here is something you need to understand about humanity. We do not fight for territory. We do not fight for wealth. We do not fight for glory. We fight for each other, for our families, for our future. You threatened those things, so we destroyed your ability to ever threaten them again. That was our goal. That was our only goal. She gestured at the document. The apology is so everyone knows what happens when you threaten humanity. The reparations are so the people you hurt can rebuild. The third requirement is so that maybe next time, someone will actually read the warning before they do something stupid. Torvak stared at her for a long time. We killed millions of your people. Yes. We destroyed your colonies. We bombed your cities. We tried to break your spirit. Yes. And you are not demanding vengeance? Elena's expression did not change. Vengeance would require us to become something we don't want to be. We are not monsters, your luminants. We are just people who wanted to be left in peace. She paused. You took that peace away. We took it back. Now we're done. The hall was silent. 346 species watched as the High Crystal Arch of the Dominion of Eternal Stars picked up a writing implement and signed the surrender document. It took less than a minute. 12,000 years of conquest ended with a few marks on paper. Torvak set down the implement and stood. What happens now? He asked. Now you go home? You rebuild. You think about what you've learned. Elena stood as well. And if you're smart, you never make us come back. The High Crystal Arch nodded once. Then he turned and walked out of the hall, his delegation following behind. He did not look back. In the aftermath, the historian Calathren finished a record. She noted that in the months following the surrender, 17 species had applied for alliance with humanity. The Terran Republic had accepted 7, rejected 3, and put the rest on a waiting list. They were not interested in building an empire. They were interested in building relationships. She noted that the Dominion had retreated to their core worlds and had not expanded since. Their economy was recovering, but their reputation never would. They were no longer feared. They were pitied. She noted that across the galaxy, a new phrase had entered common usage. When someone suggested attacking humanity, when someone proposed threatening human interests, when someone forgot the lessons of the war, others would shake their heads and say, "Don't wake the humans." She ended her record with a personal observation. I have watched civilizations for 2 million years. I have seen every kind of species and every kind of war. I thought I understood conflict. Humanity proved me wrong. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the most advanced. They are not the most numerous. But they are, perhaps, the most dangerous. Not because of what they can do, but because of what they will not do. They will not surrender. They will not give up. They will not stop. And in the end, that is what matters most. Far from the assembly hall, far from the politics and the speeches and the historical records, Elena Vasquez went home. Earth was beautiful in autumn. The trees around her house had turned orange and gold, and the air smelled like fallen leaves and wood smoke. She sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Her granddaughter came out to join her. The girl was 7 years old, with curious eyes and 1,000 questions about everything. She climbed into Elena's lap and looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Were you scared? During the war?" Elena thought about the question. She thought about the assembly hall, about Krolvath's flickering form, about the long nights waiting for news from the front. She thought about the friends she had lost and the weight she had carried for a year. "No," she said finally. "I wasn't scared. Why not?" Elena looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships were still patrolling. Human soldiers were still standing watch. Human families were still building new lives on new worlds. They were out there, spread across the darkness, carrying the spirit of Earth wherever they went. Because I knew something they didn't. The girl snuggled closer. "What did you know?" Elena smiled. It was not a tired smile anymore. It was the smile of someone who had seen the best of her species and knew that it would endure. "I knew that humans don't know how to quit." Above them, the stars shone bright and cold and endless. And somewhere in that vast darkness, 347 species looked up at the same stars and remembered. They remembered the small, soft, fragile humans who had refused to bow. They remembered the war that should have been easy and wasn't. They remembered the lesson that the Dominion had learned too late, and they reminded themselves. Whenever the thought of conquest crossed their minds, whenever pride whispered that they could take what they wanted, don't wake the humans. The galaxy was at peace. And humanity went back to doing what it did best, living, loving, building, dreaming. Until the next time someone forgot. But that is a story for another day.